War.
Yeah, boy.
It's profitable. And more Kiwis are investing. Has the increase been large? I mean, has it been really noticeable?
40% over a year.
40%?
Yeah.
But do they know that's where their money is going?
It's a really hard area to navigate.
Made even harder as civilian and military technologies merge. Welcome to the NBR Podcast. I'm Simon Shepherd. This episode is about the grey zone, that investment space where it's hard to tell whether your money is going to companies that make or supply services used in conflict. Think drones, AI, cloud services, even bulldozers. The grey zone was a topic at last week's Responsible Investment Association Australasia conference. But first, let's find out whether Kiwis actually invest in war.
Over the past year, we've seen quite a large increase in the amount of weapons in KiwiSaver funds.
Barry Coates is the founder of Mindful Money, a charity that tracks where investment funds put their money.
That goes beyond increases in the share value of the weapons companies to actually include an additional allocation of investment funds to weapons.
Active investment.
And that's of deep concern, particularly as we find that a lot of those weapons are used for conflicts that many New Zealanders would feel very uncomfortable with. So they're used in the Gaza conflict, for example. We've found in the past weapons funded from New Zealand have been used in Myanmar and Yemen and countries like that. So, most New Zealanders, when you ask them in annual surveys, and we've done 6 annual surveys in a row, together with the Responsible Investment Association of Australasia, in these surveys, 80% of New Zealanders say that they don't want to be invested in weapons.
Okay.
And when we first asked the question, we said, do you want to avoid controversial weapons like landmines and cluster bombs and nuclear weapons as one question, and another one, do you want to avoid all weapons?
Yeah.
And the results were almost exactly the
same. So 80%
and,
across the board.
And people were saying across the board, we don't want to invest in weapons.
Okay.
So that's been a very consistent finding over the past 6 years.
So this is going against what investors are saying they want to invest in. KiwiSaver investors are saying what they want to invest in. First of all, has the increase been large? I mean, has it been really noticeable?
40% over a year.
40%?
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's significant.
That's a yes.
Yeah. And again, against a backdrop of some share price increase for weapons companies, because what you see at the moment is everyone's gearing up their weapons industry.
Do the KiwiSaver investors know where their money is going?
No. I mean, if you go and ask your KiwiSaver fund, you don't get a list of the companies, let alone you don't get a list of what those companies actually do with your money. So it's why we started the charity Mindful Money, to provide investors with that information. We do a huge amount of research and then we give it all away for free, which is about the worst business model you could ever get, but we managed to make it work.
Okay.
And so people can go onto the website, they can key in their KiwiSaver fund, and they can find out in the categories that New Zealanders say in annual surveys they want to avoid, they can see what their investments are. We're not telling them how to invest. We're not saying you should have these ethics or those ethics. We're saying, of the issues that New Zealanders want to avoid in their investments, here's the companies that you're invested in and what proportion is it in your portfolio.
Okay, can I pick up on a couple of things there?
Yeah.
So is it satisfactory that you need a charity to be able to do that? Why don't we have that kind of disclosure in the reporting regime?
Good question. We would say you should,
okay.
but New Zealand actually goes a lot further than almost any other country in the world.
Really?
And we've often wondered why there's nobody like Mindful Money in other countries. And it's because there aren't those disclosure regimes that we have in New Zealand to get to the first layer. And the first layer is the direct investments in companies, and funds have to, both retail investment funds as well as KiwiSaver funds, companies have to disclose those every 6 months into a company's office register called the Disclose Register. And so you get a list of companies for the direct investments. But within those direct investments, you've got funds.
Yeah.
So most fund managers use external fund managers, particularly if you're a New Zealand fund manager, for global coverage or Australian coverage or for bonds.
And do those funds, those international funds, have to disclose?
No,
at the same time?
no. But
so
that's,
how can you work it out?
we're clever, and we do a lot of research, and there are ways these days to find out what those holdings are. So we're able to get around 99.5% of those external funds, and so when we present the information to New Zealanders, they have a full portfolio listing, including the funds within funds and the companies within the funds within the funds.
Okay.
So
it's getting quite granular.
It's a look-through basis down to 0.01% of your portfolio.
Oh, really? Okay.
So fairly granular.
No matter how granular you get, it's not easy. Underlined by the war in Ukraine.
Вот он, блядь, возле моста прям.
It's the war of drones and satellite internet.
Starlink did play a pivotal role because Russia had actually taken out all of the satellite communications and all of the ground communications except for Starlink. It was the only one that was still operating.
Commercial tech with a military application. This is the category called dual-use technology.
The question of what is a weapon is no longer as easy to define as it used to be.
John Berry is the CEO of ethical investment fund manager Pathfinder Asset Management.
You used to just think of a tank or a jet or a gun. Now every one of those weapons has thousands of individual components.
Yeah.
And so we're tracing the supplies of those components. So that's your conventional military weapons, but then on top of that, you've also got devices that are made for civilian purposes that may be repurposed for military use.
Right.
And, in that space we're thinking
Like
of
what?
Obviously a drone,
Yes.
Widely used for civilian and military purposes, and also bulldozers. We saw a week ago the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, the $2 trillion fund, divest from Caterpillar, and basically what they're saying there is that the bulldozers are made for civilian use but being weaponised, and the company is not doing enough to stop that weaponisation. And interestingly, at Pathfinder, we actually divested Caterpillar back in November 2023, and it has been a real flashpoint for ethical investors.
Why
over
did you do that
recent
back in
years.
23?
For exactly the same reason.
Oh, right. Was there a conflict somewhere where caterpillars were being used in a weaponised way?
Yeah, exactly. In Gaza.
In Gaza, right, okay.
Which is exactly the conflict zone that the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund has pointed to at the moment.
Okay, so you're talking about dual-use technology here. That seems to be the phrase. Is that? But it's not just that physical stuff as well, is it? I mean, if I've got a cloud subscription, but the same cloud service supplies to the Pentagon, that's dual-use technology.
Yeah, look, I'd imagine most military around the world will use Microsoft Excel and will use software that's for civilian purposes as well, and they may specifically create military product as well. And the really tough area at the moment is AI, data centres, data processing, and how that's been used for military.
In fact, Microsoft, through its Azure cloud service, is in the spotlight right now.
I am a Microsoft worker. I'm here today because I refuse to allow my labour to be used for genocide.
Protesters, including some Microsoft employees, allege Azure cloud services are being used by Israel to store data that's being used to target Hamas in Gaza. The claims were raised by the Guardian newspaper. Microsoft chair Brad James says the company is looking into it.
Much of what they reported now needs to be tested.
Other listed tech companies are also war adjacent. Google, Oracle, and Microsoft all provide cloud services to the Pentagon in the US. It's really muddy, isn't it? It's really muddy.
Look, it is really tough. What we have done historically is looked at revenue for a company which is not a typical weapon. We've said, okay, they're providing services to the military. We've set a 50% threshold for that. So we've said if more than 50% of a company's revenue comes from military contracts which are not a weapon in themselves, we won't invest in the company. And we created that for a North American company that provided pilot training for both civilian pilots and we found military pilots as well.
Training, okay.
And so we were saying, well, we won't invest in the jet fighter, so why would we invest in the company that trains people to fly those planes? So we divested and we set this threshold of 50% of revenue. So we're essentially saying if the company has built the core of its business around providing military, we won't invest in it. So that could be logistics, it could be training. But then you've also now got this tech area around data centres, and it just becomes much more complicated. It's an area we're doing a lot of work on, and we're not alone in this space. I'm really grappling with it. It's a really hard area to navigate.
Yeah, how do you determine how much revenue a data centre provider is gaining from a military contract versus civilian contracts? Are they that open about it?
Well, it's often difficult to get good data, and this is not just applicable to the tech companies, it's applicable to all companies. We're trying to look down to 5% of revenue, and so we subscribe to data sources, global data sources that help us and identify where revenue for individual companies comes from. And weaponry is not alone, and companies not always being transparent in the revenue sources. Anything around animal testing, for example, is the same. So from a values-based perspective, it becomes really hard. But that's kind of our mission as ethical investors to do the best we can in that area.
But can you resist the temptation as an investor? The returns are alluring. John Berry points to an exchange-traded fund that tracks the defence sector is up 41% in the past year. And then there is the pressure from this man.
The NATO allies committed to dramatically increase their defence spending to that 5% of GDP.
Billions more will flow into defence spending around the world as countries agree to spend more. Is there a temptation for any international fund managers that you've seen any commentary about to actually go, okay, I'm going to quietly invest a bit more in this scene?
The answer is yes. The answer is, although we talked earlier about the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund backing away from Caterpillar, I've also seen some fund managers quietly, reflecting the geopolitical environment, have loosened their restrictions around investing in weapons in a number of their funds to open up the opportunity to invest in weapons. And investing in weapons is tough. Like if you think of a continuum, at one extreme you've got I will invest in all weapons, which includes controversial weapons like nuclear, like landmines, like cluster munitions.
Yeah.
Then you might say, no, I just want conventional weapons. I don't want
the tanks, the guns, the planes.
Yep, that's what I want. And then another investor might say, yes, I want conventional weapons, but I just want defensive weapons. I don't want offensive weapons. And another investor might say, yes, but I don't want to kill anyone. I want non-lethal weapons that are defensive.
Right.
And then the end of the spectrum is, I don't want to invest in any of those things. So there's this continuum. The reality is investing in listed markets does not give you the nuance to decide where you are in that spectrum. You have to be on one end or the other.
Right.
So
either in or out.
You're either in or out.
Okay.
And look, I recognise the need for democracy to be able to defend itself. Totally recognise that need. But as an ethical investor, I'm either in weapons, including offensive weapons. I don't want to invest in weapons that are sold somewhere in the world I can't control, that are used for offensive purposes against people within a country or in a conflict. So we at Pathfinder choose not to invest in weapons at all.
Yep.
And the good thing for investors is there are 38 KiwiSaver providers, so people have choice and they can find one that aligns with their values. But there are a lot of people that sleep better at night and feel better and more connected with their KiwiSaver knowing they're not invested in weapons.
Okay, let's just take a quick break. If you're enjoying the NBR Podcast, Independent Journalism, please subscribe and share it around with your mates. Let's get back to the episode. John Berry has chosen one end of the spectrum, no weapons. But the ethics around investing in war can be more nuanced.
One of the big shifts that's occurred has just been the realization that investors who provide capital are part of that, as it were, responsibility chain, right?
Kiwi Dr. David Rodin is a philosopher based at Oxford University and specialises in ethics and war.
I think for a long time, there was just a sense that there was no obligation on investors at all to make sure that they were that their money was not going to be used to fund improper activities, and I think that's been the really big shift. I think the kind of first stage of that was, you can't use your money to fund killing machines. But I think the nuance on that is really trying to differentiate proper and appropriate defense against improper uses of weapons. And I think that is genuinely very, very difficult, particularly with simple weapons like guns. They get made once, they get sent out. There's very little that you can do about that. More complicated modern weapon systems, the manufacturers actually have a lot of control over how and when weapons are used, simply because they depend so much on very sophisticated maintenance and computer updates. So that actually gives weapons manufacturers much more of an ability to dictate how their weapons are used. And that, of course, flows downstream then for investors who are thinking about those things. That those all make a difference to where you want to put your money.
And also, I mean, how do you define a killing machine these days anyway? Because we're talking a lot about dual-use technology, something that can be used in a civilian context, but you put it in a military or a war context and it becomes a killing machine.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's incredibly context dependent. So, a piece of software can be deployed in one market in an entirely civilian way, but in another market, it goes to Israel or it goes to Ukraine or to Russia, and it's suddenly being used in a very, very different way. So, what that tells you is that there's a hell of a lot of due diligence that needs to be done around this. And it makes it very difficult to have broad exclusions.
So what does it mean for someone that has an investment? Not only should they know what companies they're investing in, but does it mean that they have to do a lot more research, a lot more sort of moral examination when that comes to these investments?
So look, I mean, there are two ways of thinking about this, and one kind of nice framework that I like to use as a moral philosopher is, our ethical imperatives come from really three sources. One is we need to think about the rights and the duties that we have. So one of the very profound duties that we have is not to do anything that will improperly take another person's life or injure another person. And that sits very, very high in the hierarchy of moral considerations. Below that, you've got considerations of the good, right? You want to do things that will create net beneficial impacts to people as a whole. And then below that, you have ideas of virtue, right? Of kind of what kind of person you want to be and how you want to live your life.
Okay. What about taking sides? So if you are funding something that goes to, say, Russia and you don't agree with their invasion of Ukraine, that's bad and you're not going to do that. But if the same weapon needs to be funded for Ukraine and you support them because they have been invaded, there are two sides of this moral coin.
Yeah, absolutely. And, what we're saying here, I think, is that investors do need to take sides at one level, not in the sense of being, political, I go for, red or I go for blue, but in the sense of really doing the hard work of identifying which parties really are justified in fighting and which parties aren't. And there's a very, very long tradition in moral philosophy. It's called the just war theory, that lays out the conditions for what it means to be fighting a just, appropriate, legitimate defensive war as opposed to an aggressive war. But it is also often complicated because even, take the example of Ukraine, Ukraine is almost certainly fighting a legitimate defensive war, but it is absolutely undertaken actions that are prohibited under the laws of war, for example, targeting civilian sites in Russia. So even within a just war, it's possible that weapons can be used in ways that will violate people's rights. So it really does become quite complicated.
And the other context is, of course, is that there is an increased spend, not only because of the geopolitical instability, i.e. the wars that are going on, but also the push from, say, the Trump administration for all countries to raise their GDP spend on defence budgets. So there is an opportunity there to make money for investors. So this is even more crucial right now, isn't it?
There's absolutely an opportunity to make money, and that's the reality of the situation. I mean, again, from an ethical perspective, I live in Europe, and it's very clear that our security has been threatened by Russia. I'm not convinced that this massive increase in expenditure on armaments is actually going to be the right way to make this continent secure in the long term. I've always been very interested in the work of American theorist called Gene Sharp, who did more work than probably anyone else on strategies of civilian resistance. So these are basically strategies that seek to make a country or a population essentially impossible to rule by an invader, not through arming to the teeth and fighting, but essentially engaging in various forms of, civil resistance. So, strikes, go-slows, low-level sabotage, and these are actually proven to be extraordinarily effective at resisting, occupation, oppression, and aggression, and in a much less costly way than traditional armaments.
I guess to sort of understand where you're coming from, though, is that investors now have to use a new framework, really, to look at what the opportunities are and whether they should take them.
What capitalism is also extraordinarily good at is finding new and novel solutions to old problems. And if I were an investor wanting to do, to make money, but also to do that in a way that's ethical and doesn't risk you, financing murder and death, is I would be looking for opportunities to finance, novel forms of technology, equipment, approaches that is built on these kinds of civil defense, nonviolent resistance, which are, I think in the digital space, I think there are extraordinary opportunities around that. So, I think there's also the kind of the moral potential of capital as well to find new and innovative solutions rather than just bigger and better and more destructive tanks and planes.
But this is about investing, making a return on your money. So, if you are to take a stand, no weapons, no companies that make the majority of their money from conflict, there's one last question for John Berry from Pathfinder. Do I lose out in terms of returns if I don't invest in weapons versus being an ethical investor?
Well, I suppose, for me personally, I've been on a mission for over 10 years to try and make ethical investing mainstream.
Yep.
And part of that is to help people realise that you don't have to lose out on returns by investing ethically. If you look at our growth fund, which is our largest fund, our 5-year returns are third in their category. Our return is 9.9% per annum against a peer average of 8.0%. So
that's your proof.
That, to me, that is the proof, is delivering real returns over the long term for investors. Yes, we haven't got weapons in there. We've taken a number of stances on different, ethical, values-based issues, but we can generate returns at the same time. This is not philanthropy. This is not about accepting a cost in return for your values. This, in my mind, we're here to prove that you can actually have both.
And that wraps up this episode of the NBR Podcast. Thanks to senior content producer Joseph Hisayasu. Any social clips used are listed in the description. For early access to new episodes, subscribe at nbr.co.nz. Up next, when will Spark get its spark back? It's CEO Jolie Hodson. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you then.